widespread movement of women and children to service the sex industry across Asia is no secret. Indeed, globally, the trafficking of young girls for sexual exploitation is disturbingly prevalent and has been much publicised. But it's trafficking for the purposes of forced labour that's emerged as a growing problem throughout the world, one that's largely undetected and unreported.
Human trafficking mostly concerns people moving for work. Some people have a good experience and some people end up in an exploitative situation.
The United Nations estimates that internationally there are more than 21 million people in forced labour right now, and Australia is no exception.
We've seen women in domestic servitude, men and women in other forms of exploitation, often in commercial hospitality or in agricultural work. We know from other reports that people are in exploitative labour in factories and on construction sites, but these forms of exploitation are unrecognised.
Jennifer Byrne is Director of Anti-Slavery Australia, an organisation that provides legal advice and other assistance to people who have experienced trafficking or slavery in Australia.
There's a lack of awareness about what trafficking and slavery looks like, and then there's a lack of information about what to do if there is a suspicion that a person may be living in such exploitative conditions.
In 2001, one such case did attract national attention. It involved a group of 8 Indian stonemasons who were brought over from their home country to carve stone on an Indian temple south of Sydney. It emerged that they were forced to live in 2 shipping containers and work 7 days a week for a pittance. A year ago, another case of labour exploitation was revealed. 3 Filipino men were allegedly paid less than $3 an hour to work on an oil rig off Western Australia, barely a fifth of the minimum wage and far less than other Australian workers on the rig were being paid.
To say they're being ripped off is being a bit generous. Really, it was almost slave wages in terms of the Australian oil and gas industry.
I came to this country because my cousin told me about a restaurant I could work in. Then they said I owed them $40,000.
The government admits Australia is a common destination country for people trafficked from Asia, particularly from Thailand, South Korea, the Philippines and Malaysia.
It's a problem involving young people going to work in neighbouring countries, and some of them are tricked and lured or deceived about the circumstances in which they're working.
Increasingly, it's Australia's international students who find themselves the victims of labour exploitation and bullying and racism in the workplace.
We're finding that international student cleaners seem to be more likely to suffer from bullying and harassment than other cleaners doing the same work. And we're also finding significant underpayments of international student cleaners.
One South Korean student who spoke to us under the condition that his identity wouldn't be disclosed said when he first arrived in Australia, initially on a 6-month working visa, he worked at a farm where he was paid cash. He soon discovered he was being underpaid and says he was also forced to pay for transport costs for the 5-hour journey to the farm from Melbourne, despite being told he wouldn't have to.
When I worked in the farm, it was a bad experience because they don't want to pay the tax, and they pay me like $13 per hour. But I didn't realize that is illegal, and they always lied to us.
He also said he was racially abused by the head chef in the kitchen he worked in as a part-time cook in Melbourne. Jess Walsh from United Voice says the difficulty is many international students are too scared to come forward or to approach their employers.
When they go to their employer and ask to be paid for those extra hours, employers often refuse to pay them those extra hours and then threaten to report them to immigration.
United Voice has set up a Facebook page to help international students learn about their work rights.
One of the stories that came through the Facebook page was from an international student who has been working 54 hours a week and is only being paid for 20 hours a week.
In March, Australia passed new legislation, making forced labour a separate criminal offence for the first time.
I think that as there is increased awareness of that provision in our law, there will be a greater response and more people will be identified and therefore protected.
It'll also make it easier for people to get compensation. The Australian Red Cross says for those victims of trafficking, whether for labour or sexual exploitation, who do speak out, there is a support program in place.
For anyone who has been trafficked into Australia and has been identified by the Federal Police as being trafficked, they can get support while they're providing some sort of evidence against a trafficker. So it's made it much more possible for people who've been trafficked to actually stay in Australia and be supported while they're part of that criminal justice process.